Hey, yo. If I can be serious for a minute. Oh, yeah. Acknowledge me.
Hey, what's happening, everybody? Come on in, sit down. It's time for another episode of DB's Territory Treasures. I am DB, the Dirty Bird. Welcome to another episode, man. Excited for this, man. Excited for this little side project I've been doing, man. I've had a lot of fun. I've got a lot of good feedback for it. So welcome. Come on in if you're listening for the first time, man. Thanks for coming in. This is DB's Territory Treasures, part of the Sit Down Marks podcast. So basically, this is a podcast produced bi-monthly, remembering the pro wrestling stars of yesteryear. So the latest Sit Down Marks pod is available now. If you want to go check that out wherever you get your podcasts, we're talking Royal Rumble and much more, as it is Royal Rumble season. So go check that out on any podcast platform that you listen to, or head on over to sitdownmarks.com and subscribe there. So what I got for you today, man, is, by the way, I'm going to be bringing more of these to you. You know, like you heard me say, these are going to be bi-monthly, but I'm going to be dropping, at least 2 of these probably a month. Hopefully everything goes well. So the feedback has been awesome. People love them. So I want to give you more of them because I'm having a lot of fun doing them. So I really appreciate the support. So let's hop into it. So, I've talked about the giants on these things, perfect wrestlers, skyscrapers, boogie woogies, that kind of stuff. But, what I haven't talked about is some talent enhancers, jobbers, if you will, as, a lot of people, like to say. And that goes going to end today because entering the chat, one of the most popular babyface talent enhancers from the 80s, the one and only I'm going to talk about today, Rocky King. And if you don't know about Rocky King, man, let's get into it, man, because I want to introduce you to this guy that had, I didn't know would end up being a big part of my wrestling childhood, man. So, but he was born William Boulware Jr. was his actual name on January 30th, 1958 in Richburg, South Carolina, which is just a town just straight south of Charlotte, North Carolina, across the border. He was booked at 6'1", 220 pounds in the territories of Jim Crockett Promotions and Mid-Atlantic Wrestling. Man, now look, this guy, he didn't look like your talent enhancers from back in the day. He was always in great shape. He had a six-pack most of the time, like a chiseled physique. Most of the talent enhancers back in that day, they basically look like, bloated baked potatoes, back in this era, but not Rocky. He looked great. He looked like a wrestler. And I think this kind of what helped him, get noticed. But, let's dial back. So what is a talent enhancer exactly, right? This is a guy or woman that they put in a match to obviously lose to his or her opponent while making them look superior athlete, getting them over as a star. This job, it takes being able to wrestle, obviously, take a beating, being humiliated at times, really, and not much pay. But Rocky was one of the best at doing this job. And, I think of Rocky. I also think of like Gene Lagone, the Mulkey brothers, and George South from back in this era, the prominent kind of jobber names of the 80s in that era. Google these people, George South, the Mulkey brothers, get a look at those guys, man. But, in this particular era, so Rocky, to get a little back, Rocky before wrestling was a homeless guy. He got a job from Jim Crockett Jr. and started to hang out with the wrestlers. This is what, got his foot in his door. He started around 1984 in Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling and debuted against the guy who would later become Hercules Hernandez in the WWF. His first match in NWA was versus Chief Wahoo McDaniel, a guy I'm a big fan of, a guy that my dad knew. And got the lockup with. So that was, big for me there to see that. Rocky too, like I always remember, he was like one of the first like jobbers, talent enhancers, if you will, to get some offense in on some of his opponents. because he looked the part. He looked like he could hang in there, and also, he was one of those guys that back in this era, he was often requested to work with by like some of the top talent, but because when you beat Rocky, he looked more, or when somebody beat Rocky, like a big top guy, it looked more like Rocky looked more like the part than say that person beating up a bloated baked potato, like you heard me say, so Rocky's opponents made them look even better because Rocky looked in shape. He looked like a wrestler, and around that time too, there was a booker by the name of Dusty Rhodes that really started to notice, Rocky's, getting over, the fans liking him, how he looked, how he was dedicating himself to the craft, But Rocky, the good thing about him, man, he was really good at losing, and he did that a lot. Cagematch.net tells us that he had 308 matches in his career, going 46, 253 with 9 draws. So he lost 253 times, according to Cage Match. It's probably way more than that. You know what I mean? But so. He lost to guys like Ric Flair, Tully Blanchard, Lex Luger, Sting, Arn. They all wrestled Rocky, and Rocky put them all over. He was often seen as like the jobber to the, mostly to the Four Horsemen, in the Midnight Express. Those were like his 2 big like feuds. Those were his, constant kind of matches in that area. Make no mistake about it, though. Rocky worked his way up to have these, matches with these big stars, in the companies. And he would often like have this little spot where he would end up joining factions that were feuding with Midnight Express or the Horsemen. You know what I mean? He'd always like team up with them, but Rocky even had quite a few NWA junior heavyweight title matches. Some of us old schoolers remember the old NWA junior heavyweight title. It was kind of a big deal. It was kind of like the cruiserweight title back then. You know what I mean? So, and Rocky even had a finishing move that I think obviously he didn't get to use it very much, but, he would like tease it at times. Back then the DDT was a big one, you know what I mean? So he would kind of like tease that as like, it's over, but to me, his best move was naturally probably his drop kick, like chef's kiss, man. Go study that drop kick if you're an up and coming wrestler, or just, he's one of those guys that could really get up in the air and, really launch a good, 2 feet on his opponent and come down and make him look pretty. But in 1985, Rocky had a match with Flair. This is kind of like, where it all kind of started to turn a little bit for him. He had a match with Flair. Rick shook Rocky's hand after the match, and that didn't happen very much back in those days, and that handshake did a lot for Rocky. It was like instant respect, essentially anointing Rocky as like a pro wrestler, you know what I mean? As worthy, but, oftentimes, if you've ever listened to one of these territory treasures before, I always come in with a connection, I'm going to come in a little early with this one today, because when I really started paying attention was like 1985. I'm 10 years old, right? Rocky was being attacked by the Midnight Express. So here's my connection right here. And he was saved by my favorite wrestler, not of all time, but then at the time, Jimmy Valiant. And I'm like, I love it. Here we go. Right. And I was even more hooked on wrestling now. Rocky and Jimmy as a tag team, and it was something I didn't know I needed, the Street People as they were. I kind of feel like they were, next to the Road Warriors, like kind of like one of the tag teams that I really liked, like growing up and stuff, like seeing, but, Rocky went through a lot of different things. Funny story, he had a gimmick change in 1990. He became this character called like Little Richard Marley, where he was kind of like the manager of the Fabulous Freebirds. It didn't work out very long because, Rocky's babyface, you know what I mean? And Freebirds would pretty quickly turn on Rocky, you know, so pro wrestling, right? So Rocky joined WCW when Ted Turner bought it out. You know, Rocky, you know, to me, he's kind of like one of the last of his kind, man. Then because talent enhancement or jobbers isn't really a thing anymore. You know, when the situation arises, it's needed. Most big companies or other companies, they use independent wrestlers now, you know, and for extra work, and you know, they look the part already mostly, you know, without the potbelly baked potato look, you know. So you know, it's not really a thing anymore. So you know, I mean, you know, squash matches still happen, enhancement matches, you know, whatever you want to call them, you know, but it's just not as frequent, you know, as it used to be. I mean, they kind of came back there for a little while, seemed like when AEW was doing AEW Dark, but now it seems like, you know, spot matches for independents are, you know, a little few and far between for big matches. But in '98, Rocky moved into a referee role in WCW, and you know, and this was like kind of like, you know, start of the end for Rocky. I'm thinking about Rocky, man, just you know, man, could he sell a beating? You know, he was the ultimate baby face, talent enhancement. The crowd loved him. He had like a soft spot in their heart for him, especially when he teamed with Boogie Woogie Man. You know, they took some licks together, you know, but wins didn't come very often, obviously. But a few notables did. You know, I had to dig to find some of these because I'd heard one time, you know, being from the South, that he beat Nikita Koloff in a house show in Spartanburg by disqualification. But his first pinfall win was in Florida when he pinned a guy named Jack Hart, who would end up becoming a guy named Barry Horowitz. Now, everybody in unison, we're going to pat our back. All right, now you've had time to pat your back. So outside the ring, Rocky was even better, man. Good dude, really good dude in the Atlanta, Georgia area. Started his own promotion to help, you know, keep kids off the street in Atlanta. Would often feed the homeless, never forgetting where he came from, you know, even helping kids get bikes, you know, that kind of stuff. So just really cool, man. Just really good stuff. You know, a lot of the locals even called him like the king of the streets, which, you know, I kind of like spilled off from the street people. You know, we needed more people like Rocky in the world, man, you know. Personally and professionally, probably, you know, the true meaning of selflessness, compassion, persistence, consistency, you know, determination, man. You know what I mean? Like this guy, you know, he wouldn't stop until he got, you know, to the top, or, you know, to be able to have these big matches, you know, and, you know, homeless to wrestling Ric Flair and getting a handshake from Ric Flair. You know what I mean? Like, how cool is that, right? You know, we lost Rocky in March of 2022. You know, he's no longer with us, but, you know, I'm happy to talk about him today and bring his story to light. If anybody ever knows, you know, anything about Rocky, or may not ever know, you know, these are the guys, you know, back in the days that took a beating, and he ended up being, you know, kind of the ones that, you know, ended up standing tall and, you know, etched his name in kind of wrestling lore, you know, in that era, you know. But you know, go out and look up a Rocky King match today. You know what I mean? And check it out. Look what kind of great shape he was. Check out that drop kick, you know, and just know that Rocky, you know, he did a lot for wrestling, and today we thank him. And I really appreciate, you know, what he did for wrestling and the stories that he provided, and, you know, and everything he did, you know, outside the ring too. You know, like I said, need more guys like him, you know, that always shine a good light on pro wrestling. And so we thank Rocky King for that. All right, guys, I want to thank you guys for downloading and subscribing today. I am the Dirty Bird. We'll talk to you next time on DB's Territory Treasure.